Hi, Kindred. How are you? You good? It's so good to see you and be with you. So we are continuing our look at the book of Genesis tonight. And so far, we have covered about 10 chapters, and we've studied some of the most wild and outrageous stories. In just these 10 chapters, we have seen talking snakes and giants and floods. Oh my, it feels like Oz. But what I have loved so much about this study is how when we read these stories chronologically, we are able to piece together a picture of what God was up to in the world all those years ago. And we can see a little more clearly the way each chapter builds on itself, weaving together this incredible narrative that points forward towards the coming of Jesus. And being in Genesis for me, it's also helped me to appreciate and empathize with the experience of some of the first century New Testament writers. See, these New Testament writers, they would often refer to the scriptures, or they would say, as it was written, and they would point back to these stories and these people that we're looking at in the first 5 books of the Bible. And so by knowing these stories and familiarizing ourselves with them, we get a sense of this heritage and this tradition that Jesus was born into. And we also get a sense of the very long history of God's people getting it wrong. Right, getting it wrong when left to their own devices. And it makes the need for Jesus more urgent and imminent, and I might even say a little more obvious. So we're going to pick up tonight in Genesis chapter 11 with another infamous story, which is a little ironic since this passage deals with the idea of fame. So I remember the first time I got to fly first class, because that was not like a regular thing that we did in my family. So I was on our way home on a trip with my mom and my sister, and we missed our connecting flight. And it was this whole drama because there wasn't another flight out that night, so we were gonna have to stay the night in a hotel to catch a flight the next morning without our luggage. So we arrive at the hotel, they give us like a toothbrush and a Bic razor, and they're like, good luck. So we survive the night, and we get up early, we get back to the airport, and the airport, come to find out, had upgraded our seats to first class, right, for all our trouble. So it was really an accident how this all happened. And I'm like, cool, it's a pretty sweet deal to me, like maybe let's always miss our connection. My mom did not feel the same way. She's like, this has been the worst. So my mom and sister, they get seated together, and I get sat across the aisle in a window seat. And a kind elderly woman with white hair sits down next to me. And she was pretty friendly. She chatted with me. She was really polite. She was like, so is Phoenix home? Are you just visiting? And I remember her ordering Bloody Marys, okay, more than one. And once we landed, the unassuming older man that was traveling with her approached my mom and said, do you know who that was? Like, do you know who your daughter just sat next to? And clearly she didn't. And so he tells her that was Sandra Day O'Connor, right? And if you don't know who that is, Sandra Day O'Connor is famous for being the first nominated and confirmed female justice of the Supreme Court. And I had no idea who she was. She's like this huge deal, and I had no idea. I was just a girl and had no clue that the kind old woman drinking Bloody Marys next to me, right, had built this legacy so that little girls could one day dream of becoming lawyers when they grew up, which is exactly what I wanted to be at that age. See, fame is a funny thing, right? If it had been J-Lo or any one of the NSYNC band members, I would have absolutely been able to recognize them and would have known who they were. But I guess I just wasn't as concerned, right, with the kind of notoriety that Sandra Day O'Connor had. So it begs this question, like if I couldn't recognize her, well, who's really more significant? And I guess that depends on what you're counting, right? Because Sandra Day O'Connor, she didn't sell millions of records. She doesn't really necessarily have international clout, right? She hasn't won any Grammy Awards. But she did affect the kind of change that would define a generation, right? She was the first sledder. She carved out this path for other women to follow. She changed what was possible for women in a way that we celebrate, in a way that we point to as the symbol of a reality with more opportunity, right? A reality that's more fair, a reality that dignifies, right? The image of God in women and girls. And so significance, it's not always rewarded with fame. And fame doesn't always equal great significance. Right? I mean, thanks to TikTok, you can now be famous for all kinds of insignificant things, like eating cream cheese and bell peppers in the break room at work. Like that can make you famous, pretty insignificant. But all of this is to say that I believe at its core, fame is just about recognition and significance. And I think at some level, we all crave those things. We crave recognition and significance. No one wants to feel overlooked or ignored or unseen. No one wants to feel like their life isn't important or that it doesn't matter or it doesn't have meaning, right? We want to be recognized for our achievements. We want to be recognized for our ingenuity or our originality. We want to be recognized for our contributions and our good ideas. So fame is simply just recognition on a greater scale. And doesn't this motivation for recognition explain so much of the human condition? That we desperately want to be noticed. We want to be affirmed and accepted. Right, well, the Bible warns us that this desire for recognition and significance apart from God is dangerous and that it will lead to our demise every single time. And Jesus shows us a better way. A different way. And so that different way is what we're looking at tonight. The main idea for us is that the way up, right, the way up is actually down. The way up is down and out. So I want to begin tonight by reading the entire passage, and then we'll kind of go back in and pick it apart a little bit more closely. So here is where we're at in the story of Genesis. God has created the world, and God has created human beings to partner with him in moving this creation project forward. And Adam and Eve, they make this choice, right? And this choice, it damages and it severs this partnership, and it ripples out, affecting everything that God had made, affecting each piece of creation. And things go from bad to worse. And then at one point, as Zach looked at last week, there was only wickedness in the world. There was only evil. There wasn't a shred of goodness. And so God intervenes. Okay, he chooses Noah, and he makes this plan to set things back on track by sending a great flood. And what God intended for Adam and Eve's family, that would now be lived out by Noah and his family. And we find that the very same command given to Adam and Eve is given to Noah, right? He says, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and spread out. Right, have dominion, rule over the birds in the sky, the fish in the sea, and the animals on the ground. And now we're in chapter 11. So now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. So come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand each other. So the Lord scattered them from there all over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world, and from there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. And so our passage, it begins with sameness. Right? We know from the last few chapters that the people of Genesis 11, they descended from the same family. They're all from Noah's descendant line, right? And then verse 1 tells us they all speak the same language. And here they're all living in the same place. And then in verse 3, we see the advance of culture and technology. And we see this progression from nature in the Garden of Eden to the makings of the first city. And here in verse 3, things actually haven't gone awry just yet. right? Some are really quick to want to use this story to say that technology and culture are at the root of all sin, right? Especially in the story. And then usually they go on to condemn things like iPhones and the internet, and they don't let their children read the, cultural relic, Harry Potter, and then they probably won't go trick-or-treating on Halloween. But I disagree. I think I disagree with that reading of this text, and here's why. It says God was clear. We are to make something of this world he created, and we're to partner with him in moving it forward. And so technology, the making of bricks and mortar and this sophisticated architecture, right, these advances in and of themselves aren't inherently sinful. If that was true, well then how would we account for and explain, right, God himself making a cultural artifact a few chapters before this? Right, in Genesis 3, we see God make clothing, right? A cultural artifact. He sews animal skins together for Adam and Eve. And so if God is without sin, but he goes and makes something of the world, that doesn't really add up, right? And so instead, sin is when we use culture and technology to rebel against God, right? To defy the limitations of our humanity, and then to alienate ourselves from other people. Which brings us to verse 4, which says, "Then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth.'" Now, there is so much going on here in just this one verse that we're going to spend most of our time tonight just in verse 4. Right? Because if we break it down, I think we're going to be able to identify 3 pitfalls, right? 3 pitfalls. 1, right? It says that they wanted to build a city for who? Ourselves. They wanted to build for ourselves. Let's build a great city for ourselves. This is no different, right, than the message of our modern world, right? Build a brand. Build a following, build a business, build a reputation, build a platform, right? The world is screaming at us to build things up for ourselves. We are building up vacation hours to spend on ourselves. We are building up our savings and a 401k, storing away for this retirement that we will spend on ourselves. We are building brands and labels and organizations that serve ourselves and our purposes. And look, vacation days, 401ks, that's not all bad. Like, I love an all-inclusive beach vacation, like preferably in Mexico, just as much as the next guy. But when we use all of our energy and all of our creativity and all of our resources to build up our own comfort, to build up our own safety and security, that puts us at the center of everything. It puts us at the center of life's orbit, and it displaces God from his rightful place at the center of our life. And as Christians and churches, we aren't immune to this temptation. I think that there's probably some good intention, right, that we will say we'll leverage all those likes and all those follows and all those downloads for the sake of the gospel. Or we'll use our platform, we'll use our brand for Jesus. But I think if we're being honest, when we have built up so much for ourselves, that doesn't leave a lot of room for Jesus or for his purposes or for the people he cares about. And so the first pitfall, right, is to build for ourselves. What are you building? And who is it for? Is it for your own purposes and your own comfort and your own security? And does what you're building place you at the center of everything? And it's dangerous to build for ourselves. 2, the second pitfall, they build a tower, right, that would reach where? Into the heavens, right? They would reach up into heaven. Let's build a tower that reaches to the heavens, right? This tower was meant to rival God. It was to demonstrate that they were not limited, that they themselves could reach the same status as God, that they could in fact match God himself. Now, doesn't that sound very familiar to the lie, right, the serpent used to sow discord and distrust in Eve back in Genesis 3? Right, Zach looked at this 2 weeks ago if you were here. Like the snake says to Eve, surely that fruit, right, that God told you would kill you, right? It won't do that. It will make you like God. You will rival him in your knowledge of both good and evil. And so forgetting that she was already like God, she was already made in his image, Eve desired that wisdom it would give her. Right? And then they make this choice that the world is still suffering. But that same desire, it's the same lie, right? It's playing out now here in the story of Babel. They wanted to reach past the limits that God had given them, to rival God, to be like him. And isn't this still the lie, right, that trips us up? We forget that we are already made in the image of God. We forget we are already like him in our free will and in our creativity. We're already like God in our agency, right? In the way that we rule and have dominion over the earth. And we view these limitations or these boundaries as, well, God must be holding something back from me, right? God is holding out on us. And so then we desire more. More. We reach for more influence. We reach up for more success. We reach up for more status. We reach up for more money. And we fall for the lie that believing more of these things will make us more like God, or will make us unstoppable, that we could reach the heavens, that we could reach the place of God. And so what limitations are you denying? And are you fighting? This might show up in your workaholism or in your exhaustion. It might show up in your insomnia or in your perfectionism. We cannot rival God in his limitlessness. We cannot rival God in his strength. We cannot come close to his ability to be everything to everyone, but yet we try. Right? Pitfall number 2 is reaching up into the heavens to match, to rival God. And then 3, the final pitfall is to make a name for ourselves. To make a name for ourselves. Other translations read, to make ourselves famous. Right? This tower, it was meant to define their significance. Right? It's meant to bring them recognition. And the kind of recognition that would echo into the future beyond their own lifetime. So it's about leaving evidence of their own importance, right? This tower, this monument to their greatness is about legacy. It's about legacy and fame. And legacy, that's something we can all understand. It's something we've even come to celebrate in a lot of ways, right? It explains every Lifetime Achievement Award and every, right, Oscars or Grammys. It explains maybe why we would pass down family names to our children. It explains why we would protect certain traditions or preserve the character of our team or our club. Right? Legacy is about not wanting to be forgotten, not wanting to disappear or be erased, but wanting to impart something on the world that will outlive us, right? And wanting to contribute something meaningful to the world. That is not in and of itself a bad thing. I think that's actually very close to what God commands of us. And sometimes, not a lot of the time, but sometimes fame can come as a byproduct, right, of that really noble pursuit. And so the story of Babel, it warns us not of stumbling into fame innocently, but of pursuing it, of seeking fame out for its own end, right? Because fame is intoxicating and it's all-consuming. And it will become very easy to then devote your life to holding on to it, to staying famous, to not losing fame. And it makes me think about this character from this movie that I love. It's a Christmas movie called Love Actually. Have you seen it? Yes, I know it's September and I'm talking about Christmas, but I can't wait. Anyway, there's this character in this movie called Billy Mack. Right? He's this washed up rock star, and they wind up remaking one of his greatest hits into this Christmas song. They just change a couple of the lyrics, and it's meant to be this rebrand, right? It's supposed to keep him relevant. It's supposed to keep him in the limelight, and it winds up being just absolute trash, right? And it makes for a really funny movie. But it reminds me that there's nothing cringier, right, than watching someone pine for fame, or pine for notoriety or platform just to stay in the limelight for a little bit longer. And so for the builders of Babel, it wasn't enough to be seen by God, to be chosen by him, to be created in his image, to be recognized by God as a vital part of his plans. It wasn't enough. They desired to be seen and adored by others, right, by man, and to be known and to be measured by the standard of success in their world. So the question becomes, who are we seeking recognition from? Right? Social media, your boss, your partner, your parents. And what do you believe makes you significant? Right? Is it your achievement? Is it the number of followers, the number of likes, the numbers in your bank account? What are you looking to define your significance? Right, so God sees them building for themselves, building this tower to reach up into the heavens, trying to make themselves famous. And what does God do? He intervenes again. Right, just like he did in the story of Noah, because he is a God of intervention. I remember God's command to them. It was be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, expand, spread out. And what he finds in Genesis 11 is people circling the wagons, right? Staying put, building a homogeneous civilization all for themselves that will make themselves great. And this tower, it stands in direct rebellion of what God had told them to do. And this vision, this dream for his people, for his creation. And so the Lord came down, they're trying to build a tower to reach God, and yet still God's like, oh, I'll come down to you, right? But Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. And the Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, right, they won't stop. They will stop at nothing. The nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. So come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other. And so the Lord scattered them from there all over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. And that is why it's called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world, and from there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. And so in these verses, we see that God desires unity, not uniformity. It's very different. And so he scrambles their language, and in this way, he scatters them. Right? He accomplishes what he wanted for them all along, which was go, spread out, fill the earth, multiply. And he moves this project forward, closer to what he originally intended. Right? And so what are we to do with this passage? Right? The Tower of Babel, it is an epic tale of what not to do. And it's evidence of God's intervention. Right, his participation in his creation. And as is the case for every story we will see in Genesis and throughout the Old Testament, it points forward. It points towards Christ. When God intervened in the most explosive way, right, when he put on flesh and when he moved into the neighborhood. And so if we want to know what a life of significance and a life of meaning really looks like, well, then we need only to look to Jesus, right? To the example of Jesus. And so instead of building for ourselves, the way of Jesus would tell us, build the kingdom, right? Build the kingdom. Everything we are so worried about preserving when we build up for ourselves, preserving our comfort and our safety and our security, Jesus reminds us, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And then these provisions, these things you are so worried about storing away for yourself, They will be given to you. They will be provided to you. And so build up peace and build up joy and build up shalom and build up justice, right? Build the kingdom because God's kingdom is diverse. And it is meant to reflect and include every nation, tribe, and tongue. Right? This kingdom, it doesn't intend to eliminate our distinctions, but to unite us under the lordship of Jesus Christ. And so it is globally diverse and rich and robust. It makes room for all cultures and languages and traditions. Right? And God's kingdom is everlasting. This is real legacy. God's kingdom, it can't be destroyed, it can't be overcome, and it can't be stolen away. And so don't build up for yourself, right? But build the kingdom. The way of Jesus, it doesn't reach upwards, but it compels us to reach down and out. See, Jesus was never concerned about climbing a social ladder or gaining status or success or claiming equality with God as something to brag about or to lord over other people. He gave up those divine privileges, right? He humbled himself and he took on the posture of a servant. We see Jesus reach down into the lowly and dark places. He reached down into the dirty and messy and uncomfortable places nobody else ventured to go. And we see Jesus reach out into the margins to include the outsider, right? The tax collector, the forgotten, and the oppressed. Jesus surrounds himself with society's most undesirable, right? With the lost, with the down and out. So instead of reaching up for more status, instead of reaching up for more success, instead of reaching up for more popularity, Jesus would say, no, reach down and reach out to the margins. And the way of Jesus tells us not to make our name great, not to make ourselves famous, but to make his name great. Right? See, Jesus came to represent God the Father. The Gospel of John, it describes the way that God's glory, we are able to see it and identify it. It's actually on display in the person of Jesus. And we never see Jesus seeking his own glory. Actually, many times, right, he tells the person that he just healed or performed a miracle for, he says, don't tell anyone about this just yet. We don't see Jesus trying to drum up fame or clout for himself. So in everything we do, we are to reflect the glory of Jesus, right? It's his name that has the power, right, to set people free. It's his name that has the power to save. It is only Jesus' name that has the power to forgive people. So instead of working so hard to make a name for ourselves, why don't we just proclaim, right, the greatness of Jesus' name? Don't reach up into the heavens. Don't build for ourselves. Don't make our name great, but build the kingdom, right? Reach down and reach out. And in everything you do, make his name great. That is the way to a life of true significance, a life worthy of recognition. Kindred, would you stand? We're going to pray together. God, thank you for today, God, this moment. God, thank you for this breath in our week. God, to gather, to refocus, and God, to set our eyes on you. God, this story, it rings so true somehow. It's only in chapter 11 of Genesis. We haven't made it that far into your word, God, and yet we see a message, right, for such a time as this, for today, for the things that we face. God, I pray that you would protect us against these pitfalls. God, that you would help us to be honest about our own hearts and where we are seeking to build for ourselves. God, the places we are trying to match you and rival you, God, the places where we are denying our limitations. God, the places where we do crave fame. God, we crave recognition and acceptance. God, help us to be honest about the condition of our heart. And then, God, would you empower us, right, to see that there is a better way, that Jesus shows us a different way. Would you give us opportunities to build your kingdom, God? Would you show us places where we can reach down and out, reaching people on the outside, on the margins? God, show us this better way. Jesus, we love you and we need you. And in your name I pray. Amen.